Hi everyone, welcome to week 5, I think it is. This week we're talking about disability policy and employment. So a few sort of housekeeping items before we get started on this. I just wanted to talk a little bit about your responses for last week's assignment. So again, a lot of them were really great, but one of the areas that both Crystal and I noticed where people were sort of missing the mark a little bit was around really thinking about and giving a little bit more to those answers. So some people spent a lot of time talking about sort of their personal opinion of the quotes or just explaining the quotes. So I want to really encourage you, and I've put these written works as activities in this order on purpose because you do have your paper starting to come up next week, and to really think how we break down those ideas, right? And some people really did a good job of that, but I felt like when I was reading the ones that I graded, that some people were just, it was sort of a surface level response versus really thinking about that. So I want to encourage you again this week for your activity is about the duty to accommodate, and whether you think it's a useful tool for implementing change or to drive change. And when you think about that, I want you to think about the readings that you've had for this week, and I want you to think about how the duty to accommodate sort of came about and what its purpose is, and can it serve as a force of change, or is it sort of more like a dream or a standard that's not going to be met by employers. And I want you to think back on the readings and to apply that kind of knowledge. Again, you don't have to use citations, but I want you to draw the ideas together, which is really the purpose of last week's activity, and is for this week as well. And I think just one more thing about last week that reminds me is that again, people tended to explain each of the quotes, but then when you went to, which was really the whole assignment, reflect on how they fit together or not, was not as strong in a lot of people's activities last week. So I just want to again reiterate that you want to pay close attention to the instructions, but also that you answer the questions that are actually asked of you, and to use that space as somewhere to reflect on the ideas that are covered in the readings in this class. Okay, so that being said, one more thing I wanted to let you know is that because next Friday, so this Friday the activity is due, but next Friday your social justice outline is due. I'm going to post another video about that separately, just talking about that. But I want to remind you that firstly, I hold my office hours from 10 to 11:30 on Wednesday mornings. If you have questions about putting your outline together, I've provided samples for you guys to look at, because again, look at the percentage of your overall grade that this reflects, and so you need to make sure that your outline is in detail enough to do that. But I will post another video about that separately. But I also wanted to again reiterate that I will be in my office hours. If you have questions about that, come and see me. It's way easier to talk through ideas, especially if you come to see me rather than trying to answer things through email. Also, we're going to hold a extra set drop-in session next Wednesday. So next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Crystal's going to be there to answer any sort of last-minute questions you have about your paper outline that's coming in. Okay, and then when your papers are in, that's when I'm going to distribute them to your groups, and I will provide instructions for that. Okay, so moving along to today's or this week's information. So this week is about policy and employment policy. And I think one of the things that tends to really confuse students is what policy really is. And I think that first chapter that I have listed in the readings for this week really gives a good definition of what policy means. So they say in there that policy is a purposeful set of actions by government aimed at addressing identified social problems. Okay, and they say that it is formal, it is explicit, and it is enforceable. So I think a lot of you have taken Juliet's disability in the law course, so I am assuming that you have some familiarity with that. But it according to disability or thinking about disability employment and policy specifically, there's certain things we want to look at. So again, in that first article, they talk about how disability policy often is linked with equity, access, and support. And I think if you think about what we have read and what the activities we've completed to date, that really holds true. So there are both federal and provincial policies that dictate how people with disabilities are treated, what kind of benefits they get. And there are many different sort of acts or constitutional practices that we look to. So the really important ones are the Constitutional Act, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and there's specific discussion about disability in there, the Canadian Health Act, the Employment Equity Act, and the Human Rights Act. So those are all federal policies. And if you look in that first article too, keep scrolling down, whatever province you're in, there's specific discussion about each province and their employment policies for people with disabilities. So make sure you take a look at the province you live in, or the provinces that you're interested in. We also see in federal policy the Canadian Pension Plan, so CPP disability, that people have access to when they have a disability, the disability tax credit, which is a tax credit that goes against your earnings when you file your taxes, and employment insurance, which is often for people who are temporarily disabled. Sometimes there's medical EI for people who are having a medical episode. But we do see that most policies that are enacted are actually more at a provincial level, and there's a lot of concern because provincial supports for people with disabilities have been really waning over the last several years, and that things are being cut, programs are being cut, so there isn't as much access to those things. So again, when we look at things like income assistance, which we'll look at next week, social welfare programs, so what is available to help people to be able to live, and how much people are getting to do that, and how that really sets people up for success or failure in terms of what they're doing. So again, thinking about the provinces as the payer for this, and provinces are pushing back with the federal government, saying that there shouldn't be as much provincial money spent on this and it should be more federal. So if you look at the questions in that first chapter on page 4 about policy, those are some things I thought would be really helpful in thinking about your outline for your paper as well. What do those questions look like? How do they help you sort of ask the right question to formulate your paper and formulate the direction of your paper that's coming? Okay. Now, one of the other really major things that we're talking about, and is the focus of your activity this week, is the duty to accommodate. And the duty to accommodate is a really interesting sort of concept. And I think that that what we see a lot, and when I was an employment counselor, other vocational counselors, employment counselors, myself included, talked a lot about the duty to accommodate, told employers that they had a duty to accommodate, but really didn't have a good sense of what that actually meant. And so there is 2 really important features of the duty to accommodate, which are both, again, on that link that I've posted this week in your readings. But when someone has a disability, a chronic illness, and they're employed, or even when they are becoming employed, there is an obligation for employers to adjust the rules, policies, and practices to enable people to participate fully. Okay, so one of the things we heard a lot from employers when I was in this field, and one of the things I just hear generally about this, is that it's too expensive, it's too big. So if you actually look at the literature, if you look at the stats, most accommodations cost less than $50. And many of them cost less than $500. So usually the kind of accommodations that people are requesting or need are things like flexible schedules. They're using a headset when you're at work, having an anti-fatigue mat to stand on while you're doing your job, having a sit-stand desk, being able to attend medical appointments during work hours if that's something that you need to do. So I think that there's a real, the whole mythology around how expensive this is. Now that leads us to the next concept, which is the idea of undue hardship. Okay, so undue hardship is that an employer can't be expected to accommodate you if it is beyond something that you're asking for that's beyond reasonable for employers. Okay, so that's if it costs too much, if it creates health problems for people. So the example they give on the website is a pilot who has peripheral vision loss or something and isn't able to fly a plane anymore. So again, we can imagine with a bigger company, maybe there are other jobs that that pilot would be able to do, but in the case of working for a small company, there isn't a role that they could continue to work in, so they wouldn't be able to maintain that job anymore. Some of the other types of things that undue hardship is like, again, if someone requires a building to be retrofitted in order for them to access it. So it's not such a problem here in Calgary, but again, like when I lived in Toronto and all the buildings downtown are super old and lots of them don't have elevators or they don't have wide enough hallways for people to get into, those kinds of things get into undue hardship. So undue hardship is good in that it protects employers from having to do huge things that they can't afford to do in order to hire someone, but it's also a reason that a lot of people refuse to hire people with disabilities because they claim undue hardship. And if we look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, a huge number of those petitions have been based on undue hardship. And the people, the employers, the companies who are claiming that have tended to win like a very significant portion of the time. Yes, so the third, so just duty to accommodate is really important and a concept that really needs to be well understood in order to work in this field. And just the last article talks about a human rights approach to disability and work. And that kind of approach looks at positive rights to empower people to successfully enter and remain in the workforce. Okay, so and really fights misconceptions around ability, assumed inferiority. So when you're thinking about duty to accommodate, when you're thinking about people with disabilities in the workforce, I want you to think about those things specifically. Okay, so good luck with your assignment this week. And like I said, next week I will post a video specifically about the upcoming assignment. Okay, nice to see you. Bye.